You're nothing but dead weight." Quote, those were the words my daughter hurled at me, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. I sat frozen in my recliner, the oxygen tube hissing faintly beside me, and I swear for a moment I forgot how to breathe. My own child, the same girl I once carried on my shoulders to watch fireworks, now looked at me as if I were a burden she had been chained to. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it. Maybe stress from work. Maybe the exhaustion of taking care of me since my heart gave out last year. But no. The way her eyes hardened told me the truth. She meant every single word. And those words didn't just bruise me. They erased decades of love in a single blow. I remember when Emma was 5 and terrified of thunderstorms. She would crawl into my bed, clutching my shirt, begging me not to let the lightning take her away. Back then, she believed I was strong enough to fight the sky itself. Tonight, at 40, she looked at me like I was already halfway in the grave. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. My wife, Margaret, had passed 3 winters ago, leaving just the 2 of us. I thought Emma and I would cling to each other tighter after her mother's death. Instead, grief had carved a canyon between us. You think I don't notice? She snapped again, pacing across the living room, bills piling up. You doing nothing but sitting there. Do you know what that makes me look like? Do you know how hard it is to explain to people that my father is useless? Useless. The word echoed louder than her shouting. My chest ached, not just from the bad heart, but from the memory of every night I worked double shifts to keep food on our table. Every dollar I saved to put her through college. Every birthday I skipped sleep to make her smile. I didn't shout back. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there, gripping the armrest until my knuckles turned white, and let the silence swallow me whole. Inside, something heavier than anger began to form. A decision. One that would change everything she thought she knew about me. My name is Samuel Harris. I am 71 years old. Born in a small town in Ohio, where the winters were brutal, and the summers smelled of cut grass and diesel from the tractors. My father worked on the railroad. My mother baked pies for every church fundraiser. And I learned early that life owed me nothing. If I wanted a roof that didn't leak, I had to patch it myself. If I wanted respect, I had to earn it with my own 2 hands. I started working when I was 12, sweeping floors in the hardware store after school. By 16, I was hauling lumber and unloading crates before the sun came up. College wasn't in the cards for me, but I didn't let that stop me. I joined a construction crew, and brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, I built a life I could be proud of. I married Margaret when I was 24. She was the only woman who could out-argue me and out-laugh me in the same hour. She had a laugh that filled every room like music. And I promised her that no matter how hard things got, she would never go to bed hungry or unloved. When Emma was born, I was 32 and terrified. I held her in my rough hands and wondered how a man who still smelled of sawdust and sweat could raise something so delicate. But the first time she gripped my finger, I knew my purpose had changed forever. I stopped living just for myself. Every beam I lifted, every hour of overtime I took, every blister I ignored was for her. There were nights when Margaret fell asleep on the couch waiting for me, the dinner cold on the stove, and I would quietly eat alone, staring at Emma's toys scattered on the floor. I missed moments. Yes, but I thought the sacrifices would prove their worth. Emma would have opportunities I never dreamed of, and she did. I saved for years, skipping vacations, driving the same old truck until it rattled like a tin can. When Emma turned 18, I handed her the tuition check that drained nearly every cent I had saved. She hugged me then, whispered, "Dad, I'll make you proud." I held on to that promise through every lonely night when she studied away at college in Boston. I never missed her milestones. I drove 12 hours straight to surprise her at her graduation, my hands shaking with pride as she crossed the stage. When she got her first job, I sent flowers to her office. When she called me crying over her first heartbreak, I stayed on the phone all night, listening, reassuring her that no pain lasts forever. Margaret's illness came quietly. At first, just fatigue, then tests, then hospital visits. I watched the woman I loved fade day by day. Emma was there, holding her mother's hand, but I knew she couldn't bear the sight of suffering. She buried herself in work, calling less often, staying in the city longer. When Margaret passed, the house felt like a cathedral with no choir. The silence was unbearable. I thought Emma would come home more after that. But the opposite happened. She visited on holidays, always in a rush, always with her phone buzzing. She told me she loved me, but her eyes were elsewhere. Still, I forgave her. She was young. She was building her life. I told myself she would circle back, that the roots we planted together would always hold her close. What I never expected was the shift from distance to disdain. The girl who once looked at me like her hero now looked at me like a burden. She forgot the years I carried her on my back when her shoes hurt, or the nights I stayed awake fixing her science projects because she had fallen asleep. She forgot the man I was, and all she saw was the old man I had become. But I remember every detail, every scar I earned with pride, and I will not let my life's work be rewritten as nothing. It started on a Tuesday in late October. The maple in my yard burned red under a gray sky. I stacked 2 small boxes in the garage. A tightness gripped my chest. I told myself it was nothing. I took one more step, and the floor tipped. The concrete came up fast. The radio in the kitchen kept talking about traffic and rain. I could not move. I do not know how long I stayed there. The cold went through my shirt. The smell of motor oil filled my head. I thought of Margaret and asked her to wait for me. My phone was in my back pocket. My hands would not work. I pressed one number. Emma picked up. "Dad, are you okay? Say something." I tried. No sound came. She hung up and called again. Then the siren arrived. Thin at first, then close. I counted the wail like a rope I could hold. The paramedic said my name. "Samuel, stay with me." He slid an oxygen mask over my face. The rig smelled of bleach. The ceiling light trembled with every bump. I stared at that light and thought of other ceilings. The hospital room where Margaret whispered my name for the last time. The bedroom where Emma spelled words on a poster board. I did not want this to be my last ceiling. The emergency room was a blur of hands. They cut my shirt and pushed needles. A nurse wiped my forehead with a mint cloth. A doctor leaned close. "Mr. Harris, you had a heart attack. We are going to place a stent. We need you to hold still." I nodded. A bright room waited beyond a swinging door. A voice counted. Then a deep sleep carried me under. I woke to a steady beep. A thin tube tickled my nose. Emma sat by the window with a blanket over her knees. Her eyes were swollen. She stood. "You scared me." I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I also wanted to ask about the words she had thrown at me. Useless. I kept quiet. The machine hummed and marked time for both of us. Dr. Patel came at dawn. He drew a small diagram on a paper towel. A blocked artery. A stent holding it open. Damage that could heal if I respected the rules. Cardiac rehab. Less salt. Daily walking. No ladders. No heavy lifting. He paused. "You will need to let people help you." That was the part that hurt the most. I had been the helper all my life. Rehab began in a room with rubber mats and lemon cleaner in the air. Treadmills faced a television with bright morning hosts. My legs shook. Sweat stung my eyes. A nurse named Carla watched my monitor. Good pace. Breathe through it. You are not alone. I tried to believe her. Each step felt like it belonged to a stranger. I went home with a bag of pills and a list of warnings. No driving for 6 weeks. No lifting over a gallon of milk. The house was the same, and it was not. My tools looked back at me from the wall like animals I could no longer tame. The truck keys on their hook were a story from another life. I slept in the living room because the stairs mocked me. The oxygen machine hummed and measured a smaller life. The bills came. Insurance covered part. The rest belonged to me. I sold the hunting gear I never used. I sold the mower Margaret teased me about. I kept my wedding ring and my toolbox. I traced each handle with my finger and made a quiet promise. Emma visited more. She ordered groceries and set timers on my phone. She washed the sheets and folded them in neat stacks that smelled like lavender. We ate soup in silence. I thanked her. She nodded without looking up. Her phone glowed. She had a meeting and a deadline and a life that kept running even while she stood still. I tried to heal. One afternoon I carried a shoebox from the porch to the hall. My chest pinched. I leaned against the wall until the sparkles faded. Emma walked in and saw the box. She sighed. Dad, you promised. Why make this harder? I said I wanted to feel useful. The word sounded thin. She rubbed her temples and shook her head. At night I lay awake and listened to the house. The fridge hummed. The old pipes clicked. A train called somewhere far off. My hand rested on the sore spot in my chest. I thought of my father on the railroad. I thought of Margaret and her laugh. I thought of Emma asleep on my arm. I wondered when my strength had turned into a burden for the person I loved most. The fall was not just one day on a garage floor. It was the slow slide that kept going after the siren stopped. It was the way a chair becomes an island. It was the way friends stop calling because they do not know what to say. It was the world moving on without you. I learned to breathe with help and walk the slow way. I smiled at nurses and pretended it did not hurt. What I did not learn was how to accept the look in my daughter's eyes when she thought I could not see her. A look that weighed me. A look that counted cost. A look that asked how long. I closed my eyes and made a promise to the quiet room. I would not let the story end with me in a chair. I would stand up in the only way left. I would become the father she could not ignore, even if it broke me first. It did not happen all at once. At first, Emma's words were small sighs, the kind you brush off, a mutter when she thought I was asleep, a roll of her eyes when I asked for help with the remote. I told myself she was tired, that caring for me was heavy, that she didn't mean it. But small sighs grow teeth. One evening, the television flickered in the background while I tried to stand. My legs trembled. I reached for the counter. Emma walked in, still in her blazer, phone in her hand. She looked at me struggling and said flatly, "You're going to break your neck." Then she brushed past me to the fridge. "No." "Are you okay?" "No." "Let me help you." Just a tone that made me feel like a child. Another time, I asked if she could drive me to rehab. She didn't even look up from her laptop. "Can't you take a shuttle?" "Dad." I said I could, but I just wanted her there. She exhaled like I was asking her to carry the world. "Fine. But hurry. I have calls." The ride was silent. She dropped me at the curb and drove off before I closed the door. The nurse gave me a pitying smile when she saw the taillights vanish. The day the words cut deepest was a Sunday. Emma was cleaning, shoving papers into drawers. I asked if she wanted lunch. She snapped, "Stop hovering. You don't do anything all day. Dad, you just sit. Let me at least get something done." Her voice didn't crack. It was steady, deliberate. I felt the air leave my lungs, not from my bad heart, but from the knife of her sentence. I sat back in my chair, staring at her. This was my daughter. The same girl who once begged me not to die during a thunderstorm. Now she spoke as if I was already gone. I wanted to remind her of the nights I carried her to bed when she fell asleep on the couch. Out of the mornings, I packed her lunches with little notes tucked inside. I wanted to scream that I gave her everything I had. But I said nothing. Silence was the only armor I had left. She didn't notice. She stormed into the kitchen, clattering dishes, muttering about bills and deadlines. I heard the words useless and burden slip from her lips like they belonged there. She didn't know I was listening. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted me to hear. Later that night, I watched her on the porch with her phone pressed to her ear. She laughed at something a friend said. The sound once brought me joy, but now it hollowed me out. She hung up, caught me staring, and looked away too fast. Shame flickered across her face, but it vanished before I could be sure. I lay in bed with the oxygen hissing beside me and thought of Margaret. She had always believed Emma had a tender heart. She used to say, "Our girl will never forget what you did for her." But the girl Margaret believed in was gone, or buried deep under something harder. The betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in the way she stopped seeing me. I became furniture, a chore, a shadow. I was not her father anymore. I was the weight she dragged behind her. That night I prayed not for healing, not even for strength. I prayed for proof that I had not wasted my life on love that could vanish so fast. The silence gave me no answer. Only the steady beep of the machine at my bedside reminded me I was still here. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Pain twisted into resolve. If my daughter saw me as useless, then she had no idea who I truly was, or what I still carried inside. One day she would know. One day she would remember. Morning came slow. I learned to move like a careful animal. One step, then breath. Another step, then breath. The kettle clicked. The house held its winter chill, even in spring. I poured oatmeal into a bowl and watched the steam fog my glasses. It was bland, but I ate every spoonful. It felt like proof that I was still doing something for myself. Rehab said to walk 10 minutes. Then 12. Then 15. I made a loop through the living room to the hall and back. The oxygen line tugged at my ear. I slid my hand along the wall for balance. Outside, Mrs. Lewis swept her porch. She waved when she saw me in the window. I waved back and pretended that was enough conversation for a day. Memories did not ask for permission. They came when they wanted. I saw Margaret in her yellow dress laughing at the county fair. I saw Emma on the floor with crayons, making a crooked rainbow and spelling our names under it. Sam. Mom. Emma. The paper still lives in a folder in the hall closet. I open it sometimes and smell the wax and dust and years. I tried to fix the old mantel clock with a soft cloth and a small brush. The hands had stopped the week Margaret died. I told myself it was a sign of loyalty, that even time took a knee when she left. My fingers were clumsy now. The screws resisted. I whispered to the stubborn brass like a man bargaining with an old friend. "Work with me, please." The clock stayed silent. I set it back and thanked it for trying. Emma came by after work and stood in the doorway with her coat still on. "How are you?" I said I walked 12 minutes. She checked her watch. "Good. Keep it up." She put groceries on the counter and turned to go. "There is a sermon online tonight," I said. "The one your mother loved. Do you want to watch together?" She stiffened. "I have a call. Maybe later." Later did not come. I watched alone. The pastor said, "Love is patient and kind." I held that sentence like a warm stone and let it rest in my pocket. I kept a notebook on the coffee table. Each day I wrote 3 things I could still do. Boil eggs, water the fern, fold towels, Under that, I wrote 3 memories I was afraid to lose. Emma in pigtails. Margaret dancing in the kitchen with a wooden spoon. The way our porch smelled after rain. Some nights, the ink blurred. I told myself it was the light, not my eyes. Friends called less. At first, they asked for updates and promised to stop by. Then messages became thumbs up and hearts. Then nothing. I did not blame them. Sickness makes the air heavy. People like clear skies. I played their old voicemails to hear their living voices. I played Margaret's last message on my birthday. She had sung the whole song off key. I pressed the phone to my ear and closed my eyes until the ache eased enough to breathe. One Saturday, I cleaned a drawer of junk. Batteries that no longer worked. Pens that had dried out. A ticket stub from a baseball game where Emma and I ate hot dogs and cheered like fools. At the back, I found a small tin box. The lid squeaked. Inside were a faded photo of me and 2 men in suits, and a brass key that fit no door in the house. The photo had a coffee stain in the corner. I felt a pull I could not name. I closed the lid and set it on the shelf. Not yet. I tried to make things easier. I set my pills out for the week and labeled them with big letters. Morning, noon, night. Emma came over and still counted them again. She spoke without looking up. If you mess this up, I cannot fix it. I nodded. I wanted to say I had been fixing things long before she was born. I wanted to say I knew how to follow rules when life depended on it. I swallowed the words and drank water instead. She cooked soup and set it down hard, as if the bowl had offended her. We ate at the small table. The spoon scraped the ceramic. I asked about her work. She said fine. I asked about the city. She said crowded. I asked if she was sleeping. She said enough. Then she gathered the bowls and ran them under hot water. The steam fogged the window and hid our reflections. That night I wrote a letter I did not send. Dear Emma, I am not a bill. I am not weight on your ankle. I am the man who built your treehouse with 1 good hammer and a bent nail. I am the hands that held your bicycle seat as you learned to pedal. When you fell, I ran beside you and picked gravel out of your knees. I kept running until you learned to balance. You do not have to carry me. You only have to remember who I am. I folded the letter and slid it under the clock. The next morning, she found a box on the porch. A delivery I could not lift. She knocked with her knuckle and called through the door. You cannot order heavy things. I said it was a blanket. She shook her head. Think. Dad. Please. The word please did not soften the sentence. When she left, I carried the blanket inside in 3 trips. It felt like winning a small private war. In the afternoons, I practiced my signature. The heart attack made my hand wobble. I drew lines on scrap paper until they straightened. Samuel Harris. Over and over. It seemed foolish. But it calmed me. The act felt like building a fence, 1 post at a time. It felt like telling myself I still existed in ink that would not wash away. Church friends sent a casserole. I ate 1 square and saved the rest. I wrote a thank you note with careful lines and asked Mrs. Lewis to drop it in her mailbox. She smiled and said, of course. Kindness still lived in small places. I learned to look for it. One evening, I brought out a blue folder with papers Margaret had kept safe. Birth certificates. Old insurance. A deed with my name. I ran a finger over the raised seal and a plan began to take shape in the back of my mind. Not revenge. Not pride. A plan to stand up without standing. A way to remind Emma that I was not the sum of my pills and appointments. I put the folder away. The quiet in the room grew lighter, almost like breath. I set 2 plates at the table out of habit. I poured water into 2 glasses. I ate slow and left the other plate clean for hope. After dinner, I stood on the porch and watched the last light slide off the maple. A train called somewhere to the east. I held the brass key in my palm until it warmed. Soon, I said. Not to the key. Not to the papers. To the man I used to be. Come back to me. Come back and bring me home. The tin box would not leave me alone. Every time I opened the closet, my eyes found it. I told myself it was nothing more than old scraps. But deep down, I knew better. Margaret had placed that photo and that brass key there for a reason. She always believed the past had a way of guiding the future. One night, when the house was quiet and the oxygen machine hummed steady, I brought the box back to the table. I studied the faded photograph again. 3 young men in suits stood in front of a building half-finished. Steel beams rising against the sky. One of them was me. My hair still thick and dark. My shoulders broad. To my left stood Charles Whitman, the banker who believed in our vision. To my right was David O'Neill, a man with calloused hands and a laugh that could shake the rafters. Together we built more than a company. We built a foundation for families to stand on. The brass key gleamed under the kitchen light. I remembered the office. It opened the first real office I had ever sat in. The wood desk. The smell of ink and sawdust. The sound of workers below shouting orders. That key had lived in my pocket for years. I had used it to open every meeting, every deal, every step forward. Somewhere along the way, as Margaret's health failed and Emma's world grew larger than mine, I tucked it away. But keys never lose their purpose. I pulled out the blue folder next. Inside were contracts, stock certificates, and letters with my signature etched bold. My hands trembled as I turned each page. Decades ago, I had invested everything I had into that construction firm. When others sold their shares, I held on. When others cashed out, I doubled down, quietly, without fanfare. I became one of the majority owners. Nobody outside the founding circle knew, not even Emma. Margaret had been the only one aware. I still remember the night I told her. Sitting at our small kitchen table with a single lamp glowing, she listened with wide eyes as I explained how much of the company I owned. She laughed and said, "Samuel, you'll be the quiet king of bricks and mortar." I told her I had no interest in thrones. I only wanted security for her and for Emma. She kissed my hand and promised to guard the secret until I was ready. She kept that promise. Now, as I sat alone, the weight of that secret pressed on me. My daughter thought I was powerless, a man who had lost all worth. She had no idea that decisions in boardrooms still echoed with my signature, that salaries and layoffs could still bend at my will. She had no idea the roof over her own head had been financed by the company I had built with sweat and stubborn faith. I closed the folder, but the truth would not stay closed. It pulsed in my chest, stronger than the ache of my failing heart. I thought about the men and women who still worked in those buildings. The foreman who once shook my hand with gratitude. The secretary who remembered every birthday. The crew who laid brick after brick while trusting that the foundation would hold. I owed them more than silence. Emma came by the next morning, moving briskly as always. She asked about my pills, checked the thermostat, and frowned at the stack of bills on the table. She didn't notice the box or the folder. She didn't notice the way my eyes followed her. Not with anger, but with the burden of knowledge she did not share. I wanted to tell her right then, to shout that her father was not a useless old man, but the words stayed behind my teeth. Timing mattered. A truth spoken too soon can fall on deaf ears. After she left, I sat on the porch with the key in my palm. The metal warmed against my skin. I thought of David O'Neill's booming laugh and Charles Whitman's faith in a boy with nothing but grit. I thought of Margaret's gentle hand on mine the night she told me to keep believing in myself. And I made a vow. I would not let Emma drown in her contempt. I would show her, not with speeches, not with pleas, but with proof that the man she dismissed still held the power to change everything. That night, as the house settled into silence, I placed the key on the table beside the folder. For the first time in months, I felt stronger than my weakness. A storm was coming, and I would not hide from it. The truth was mine to reveal, and when the moment came, it would cut through every cruel word she had spoken. I began with the bus. I did not want Emma to see my truck missing and ask questions. The bus moved slow through the city streets. I watched men in hard hats cross under scaffolds I had paid for long ago. The office rose from the block like a clean white cliff. I had stood on that roof when it was just steel and sky. Now the lobby smelled like lemon polish and new money. The receptionist did not know me. She looked at my oxygen bag and smiled the way people smile when they are sorry for you. I asked if I could wait in the seating area. She nodded. People hurried past with badges that flashed under lights. They did not look up. My picture hung on a wall near the elevators. A ficus plant hid half my face. I stood and slid the pot a little to the left. A small thing. It let me breathe. I saw Emma before she saw me. She wore a hard hat and a blazer and spoke fast to a young man with a tablet. Her voice was not cruel. It was tight. The voice of someone who lives by clocks. She walked past me without a glance. I let her go. I was not here for a scene. I was here to see the truth with my own eyes. I called Ruth Delgado from a bench near the windows. Ruth had started as a site assistant and climbed every rung. She answered on the first ring and told me to come by the river project at dusk. Fewer eyes then. I took a second bus and walked the last block. My legs complained, but my mind was clear. The site felt like home. The air held the bite of cut lumber. A crane moved slow against the pink sky. Ruth met me near the chain-link fence. She hugged me quick and steady. "Your face is thinner," she said, "but your eyes are the same." She led me along the gravel path to a quiet spot behind a storage container. From there we could see the temporary office. Emma stood inside with two supervisors. She held a stack of papers and pointed to a chart on the wall. Ruth spoke low. "She has a new title. Senior Project Lead. Smart. Quick. Her numbers are sharp, but she cuts too fast. She thinks loyalty is a cost line. Last week she told the crew we do not run a museum for old hands." I felt the words land on my chest. I watched a mason with white hair coil a rope with careful fingers. He had built half this city. He kept his head down like a man on thin ice. Emma stepped out and crossed the yard. A young electrician dropped a box of fittings. They scattered across the dirt. He bent to pick them up. His ears red. Emma knelt first and helped him. For a moment her face softened. She asked if he was new. He nodded. She told him where to find the tool room and to ask for Carla. Then her phone rang. The softness vanished. "We cannot slip the deadline," she said into the phone. "Find the savings. We cannot carry people who will not carry themselves." She disappeared into the office. Ruth's jaw set. "She is not a bad person," she said. "She is running scared. The board wants margins up. A new finance chief keeps sending memos. The kind that leave fingerprints on every decision but never a name." I thought of Charles and David and the promises we made. We said we would build, and we would not forget the hands that lifted the beams. I felt the old anger rise and then settle into something harder. A plan is steadier than anger. That night I walked past the community center we built 15 years ago. A plaque by the door listed the founders. My name was second. Dust dulled the bronze. I wiped it with my handkerchief until it shone. Inside, a teen basketball game was in full noise. A boy made a shot and whooped. His mother clapped and covered her mouth as if joy was a secret. I leaned against the wall and watched for 5 minutes. Hope lived here. Hope had my fingerprints on it too. The next morning, Ben Carter from procurement called. Ben had been a kid when we hired him. He sounded older now. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I know you keep a low profile, but I think you should see a few things." He spoke about supplier cuts that looked cheap today and costly tomorrow. He spoke about safety corners shaved to please a spreadsheet. He stopped and chose his words. "Emma is pushing hard. Sir. She says it is the only way to keep the board happy." I thanked him and told him to email the files to the address only old friends still had. I sat with those files all afternoon. My heart thudded slow. My mind did not blink. In the evening I rode the bus again and stood across the street from the headquarters. Lights glowed on the top floors. In a window I saw Emma's shape move back and forth. She paced with one hand in her hair. She was not a villain. She was mine. She was a girl who had once asked me to fight the storm. Now she had become a storm that did not know how to stop. On Friday I went to a small site near the stadium. Alicia Kim ran that crew. She was 30 and already carried herself like a person built from steel and kindness. She handed out water before she handed out orders. When she saw me, she hugged me and told me the truth straight. "We can still build the right way, Mr. Harris. But we need a spine in the room when budgets get drawn." I asked her how the team felt about Emma. Alicia stared at the dirt for a moment. She said Emma was brilliant and cold. She said the crews would take a hard leader over a fake friend, but they would not follow someone who forgot their names. I listened more than I spoke. I watched people work. I watched how they looked at the office trailer when the door opened. Hope flared when Alicia came out. Shoulders sagged when a stranger in a suit did. I wrote names in my notebook. People who still held the line. People I would lift when the time came. At home, I did not tell Emma where I had been. She breezed in with a new coat and a tired face. She set a bag of groceries on the counter and froze when she saw the tin box. She asked what it was. I said old things. She shrugged and reached for a glass. She did not ask which old things. She did not want to know. Her phone buzzed. She read the screen and smiled at a message I could not see. Then she looked at me, and the smile died. "Try to take your evening pills on time, Dad. I do not have capacity for surprises." She left before I could answer. I sat with the key again. I counted my breaths. I pictured the long table in the boardroom. I pictured the faces around it. Some I loved. Some I did not trust. I pictured Emma sitting near the end with her chin lifted and her armor on. I whispered to the quiet room. "I am not here to break you, girl. I am here to save the house we built. If saving it saves you too, then let it be so." The maple shook outside my window. A train called in the dark. I closed the notebook and slept for the first time in days without waking in a panic. I had seen enough. Shadow watching had given me what I needed. The next step would take more than eyes. It would take hands and signatures, and the old steel in my spine. I set my alarm for early. Morning would be for gathering. The next morning I cleared the kitchen table as if preparing for war. I laid out folders, contracts, the old photo, and the brass key. Sunlight touched the papers, turning the dust into a haze of gold. For a moment I felt Margaret in the room, the way she used to hum while folding laundry. Her voice was gone, but her steadiness remained. I began calling the people who had never let me down. First was Ben Carter. He came that afternoon with a manila envelope full of procurement reports. He sat across from me, shoulders hunched like a boy again. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I knew you'd come back someday. The house needs its builder." He left the envelope and squeezed my hand. Rough to rough. Next was Ruth. She brought a stack of safety records and stayed long enough to drink 1 cup of coffee. She glanced at the oxygen tank by my chair and shook her head. "You shouldn't be carrying this load alone," she said. I smiled. I carried heavier. "This one matters more." She nodded and slipped out without another word. I called my lawyer, Thomas Green, the same man who had handled our first contracts 30 years ago. His voice cracked with age, but his tone was steel. Samuel, your shares are intact. You could walk in tomorrow and sit at the head of the table. Nobody can deny you that. He promised to prepare the necessary filings. Clean copies. Ready for signatures. Each night I studied the documents until my eyes burned. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Corners cut. Loyalty discarded. Decisions dressed as strategy, but dripping with short-term greed. And Emma in the middle of it, carrying orders like chains. Convinced she was leading. My chest ached not just from the damage done to my heart, but from the weight of what she had become. Still, I reminded myself she was not the enemy. The enemy was forgetting. Forgetting the men who laid bricks in snow. Forgetting the women who typed contracts until midnight. Forgetting the vow we made that no one would be left behind. I had let silence reign too long. Now silence would end. I opened Margaret's cedar chest one evening. Inside were letters she had kept. Notes from founders. Small tokens of pride. At the bottom lay a folded page I had not seen before. In her handwriting it said, Sam, when the time comes, show Emma who you are. Do not let her think you are less than the man who built her world. I pressed the note to my chest until the paper softened from tears. I began writing too, letters to old colleagues. Letters to workers whose names still glowed in my memory. Each one short and plain. I will be present again. Hold the line. I mailed them quietly, trusting the post to carry the spark. Emma visited one evening, rushing in with her hair pinned high. She spoke about deadlines, budgets, meetings. I listened without interrupting. She noticed the papers on the table and frowned. Dad, why do you keep all this junk out? I slid my hand over the folder and smiled faintly. Some things aren't junk, Emma. Some things keep the walls from falling. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about resting, and went upstairs. I let her go. Timing. That night I sat with the key in my palm, tracing its edges. I pictured the boardroom, the rows of faces, the silence when I entered. I pictured Emma's surprise, her disbelief, the moment she would understand. I did not crave her shame. I craved her awakening. I rose before dawn the next day and dressed slowly. Light blue shirt, dark jacket, the old watch Margaret gave me on our 20th anniversary. I packed the folder into a leather briefcase and placed the brass key in my pocket. In the mirror, I saw a man aged, bent, weakened. But behind the lines and scars, I saw the builder still. Strength is not in muscle or speed. Strength is in standing again after the world calls you useless. Strength is in knowing when to reveal the truth. And I was ready. The taxi rolled to a stop 1 block from the headquarters. I asked the driver to let me out early. I wanted to walk the last stretch. My legs were unsteady, but each step reminded me I still belonged to this ground. The morning air smelled of rain and hot asphalt. People hurried past with coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. None of them knew that an old man in a worn jacket carried a key that once opened their world. The glass doors loomed ahead, polished and bright. The guard at reception looked no older than Emma had been when she left for college. He straightened when I showed my faded ID badge. For a second, his eyes flickered with recognition. "Welcome back, Mr. Harris," he said. I felt the words settle in my chest like steady fire. I nodded and passed through. The lobby had changed. Sleek screens displayed numbers and slogans. But the bones were the same, the marble floor I had approved. The beams we set in place before Emma was even born. I paused at the wall of portraits. My own photograph hung there, dull with age. People walked past without noticing. I placed my hand on the glass. "I'm here," I whispered. Frank Miller appeared in the hallway. Older now. Hair white. Shoulders still squared. He stopped when he saw me, his mouth opening like he had seen a ghost. Then he grinned. Wide and true. "Sam, I knew you'd come." He gripped my hand so hard my fingers ached. We didn't waste words. He led me upstairs. On the 3rd floor, I unlocked a door with the brass key. The lock turned as if it had been waiting for me. The room smelled of dust and coffee grounds. My old office. The desk stood where I had left it. Polished now, but still mine. I set my briefcase down and opened the window blinds. Sunlight spilled across the floorboards. For a moment I felt Margaret standing behind me. Proud, I walked the halls slowly. Workers noticed. Conversations softened when I passed. Some looked puzzled. Others whispered. Then one by one, their eyes changed. Recognition spread like fire through dry grass. Joe from the warehouse shook my hand with tears in his eyes. Martha from quality control hugged me hard. "We thought you'd forgotten us," she said. "Never," I answered. "I was only waiting. Things." At noon, I went to the break room. It was crowded with young faces. I sat at a corner table and poured myself coffee. Silence rippled outward as people recognized me. A young woman whispered, "That's him." I looked up and said, "Don't whisper. If you know my name, say it." She cleared her throat. "Mr. Harris." The sound filled the room. I smiled and lifted my cup. Word traveled fast. By mid-afternoon, the building hummed with questions. Some spoke of surprise, some of fear, some of hope. Emma was in meetings all day. She didn't know I had returned. That suited me fine. I wasn't here to sneak or to hide. I was here to reclaim. I spent hours reviewing files Frank brought me. Decisions stamped without my knowledge. Cuts approved with no care for consequences. Names of loyal men and women erased from payroll like they had never existed. My chest burned. Not from weakness, but from fury. Held too long. Late in the day, I walked past the glass conference room. Through the door I saw Emma, standing at the head of the table, speaking fast, pointing at charts. Her face was fierce, confident, tired. She hadn't seen me. I paused just long enough to let the image sink in. My daughter, carrying herself like she ruled the place. Not knowing the ground under her feet belonged to me. I returned to my office and closed the door. I placed the brass key on the desk, beside the stack of documents. My hands shook, but not from fear. From purpose. Tomorrow, the house would know its builder had returned. I arrived before the sun lifted its head. The building was quiet. The kind of quiet that lets a man hear his own resolve. I unlocked my office and laid the papers on the desk. The brass key shone like a small star beside them. I stood by the window and watched the first workers cross the plaza with coffee in their hands. The sight steadied me. This house still had a heart. Frank came in without knocking. He looked at the stack, then at me. He nodded once. I asked him to send a simple note to the leadership list. Main conference room. Attendance required. No subject line that could start a rumor and choke it before it breathed. They came in waves. Supervisors, planners, site leads, finance, procurement. Faces I had known for decades, and faces I had never seen. The air tightened as chairs scraped, and whispers moved around the table. Emma entered near the end with a folder pressed to her chest. She stopped when she saw me at the head. Surprise flashed across her face. Then confusion. Then something like anger. She took a seat on the side. Spine straight. Eyes fixed on me. As if she could will me to disappear. I did not sit. Some moments require a man to stand. I placed both hands on the table and waited until the room settled into a single breath. My name is Samuel Harris. Some of you know me. Some of you only know the stories. I helped pour the foundation under every beam in this house. I am here because I forgot one thing. I forgot that a house can lose its memory if its builder goes quiet too long. A few heads bowed. Ruth watched me like a lighthouse watches a dark sea. Joe stared down at his hands. Alicia stood near the back, with her crew jacket tied at her waist. I opened the folder. I did not flourish pages like a showman. I laid them down one by one. Founding minutes. Early contracts. Share records with my name where it mattered. The room leaned forward as if pulled by a tide. This is who I am to this company. I never cared for titles. I cared for the work. But here are the papers that answer any question about where I stand. I saw Emma's throat move. She did not speak. Her fingers tightened on her folder until the cardboard bent. I told them a story they already knew but needed to hear from the source. 3 men on a dirt lot. A loan that should have been denied but was not. Winters where wind rushed through raw steel. Summers where concrete baked and men burned their palms and kept going. I reminded them of the sentence we wrote on a yellow legal pad the night we signed the first big contract. We build for families. We do not spend lives to save pennies. I closed the folder. I let the silence sit until it turned from shock into attention. I said what I had seen in my time away. Corners cut in the name of speed. Safety treated as a line to edit on a spreadsheet. People who had given 20 winters pushed out with a soft email. I looked at the finance chief. I looked at procurement. I looked at operations. I did not single out names to shame them. I named the pattern and I named the cost. Then I said what I had done in the last week. I had walked the sites. I had listened to the crews. I had visited the community center whose plaque we stopped polishing. I had asked myself whether the house still smelled like people. It did. But the scent was faint. It needed air. I turned to the back of the room and asked Alicia to step forward. I asked Ruth to step forward. I asked Joe to stand where he was. I let the room see them. These are the keepers of our lines. When they tell you a schedule is unsafe, you listen. When they tell you a cut will cost more than it saves, you believe them. If you want to know who we are, watch how we treat them. I felt the room breathe again. Someone exhaled like a held note had finally ended. I looked at Emma. I kept my voice steady. Emma, I did not come to hurt you. I came to correct a course I set long ago and then abandoned to silence. You are strong. You are bright. You are my daughter. But somewhere along the way, you learned to measure worth only in speed and budgets. That is not our way. That cannot be your way if you want to lead here. Her lips parted, then closed. A flush rose in her cheeks. She stared at the table to keep the room from seeing her eyes. I laid out the first decisions. Effective now. All pending layoffs were paused until a full review of safety and quality impacts could be completed. Effective now. Safety budgets would be restored to levels that matched real conditions on the ground. Effective now. Crews would be included in planning meetings before a timeline was carved in stone. No applause came. It was better than applause. It was the kind of stillness a man feels when a structure stops shaking. I did not speak about punishments. That was for another day. And not the first day. I spoke about presence. I told them I would be on site twice a week. I told them my office door would be open at a real hour. Not a pretend hour. I told them I would read reports with the same care I once used to read blueprints while a crane waited. I reached into my pocket and placed the brass key on the table so the light caught it. This opened the first office we ever had. I kept it to remind myself that doors are meant to be opened from the inside. I forgot that for a while. I remember now. I turned to the wall of glass. Outside. Workers crossed the plaza with lunch in hand. A boy tossed a ball of foil into a can and missed. His friend picked it up and put it where it belonged. Small acts. I said, build a culture. We will build ours again from the ground up. We will do it without breaking the people who carry the bricks. I faced the room and let the last words settle. I am not here to be a ghost on a wall. I am here to be a father to this house again. If you want that house to stand, stand with me. If you want a place where your name matters, work beside me. If you want a company your children can point to and say, we did that, then remember this day. I ended it there. No grand speech could do more. People rose in ones and twos, unsure whether to speak or leave. Alicia stepped close and whispered that the crews would hear by sundown. Ruth touched my shoulder and said, welcome home. Joe wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Emma stood last. She did not come to me. She held her folder like a shield. She looked at me long enough for me to see the child she had been and the woman she had become. Then she turned and walked out. The door closed soft. Not like a slap. More like a breath held too long. I gathered the papers. I put the key back in my pocket. My heart thudded steady. The floor felt solid under my feet. The house had heard me. Tomorrow would bring the lesson. Tonight I would go home and sit at the table where Margaret once folded laundry, and I would thank her for the note she left me. I would thank the boy who missed the trash and the friend who set it right. I would thank the past for opening the door. The next morning, sunlight poured through my curtains as if it knew what I had to do. I dressed slow, buttoning the same blue shirt I had worn for years of meetings. Years of groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. My reflection in the mirror was older. Lines carved deep, shoulders stooped. But behind my eyes the fire had not dimmed. I carried the leather folder under my arm and slipped the brass key into my pocket. Today was not for shadows. Today was for lessons, at 10 sharp. I called a board meeting. No memo this time. No whispers. A clear order in my name. By noon, the conference room was full. The air hummed with tension. Emma sat at the far end. Arms crossed tight. Jaw set. She tried to mask her fear with impatience. But I could see the storm inside her. I opened the meeting with one sentence. Respect is not optional. The words hung heavy until even the hum of the projector seemed to quiet. I told them what every father learns too late. That love without respect collapses under its own weight. And that work without respect poisons the hands that build it. I laid the first document on the table. A restructuring plan. Not to erase, but to rebuild. Martha and Ruth would oversee training and safety. Joe would lead a retention committee to keep skilled workers from slipping away. Alicia would head a task force to bridge field and office, so voices from the ground were not drowned by numbers on a page. Their eyes widened as they read their names. For years they had worked unseen. Today the house saw them. Then came the moment I had wrestled with all night. Emma, my daughter, my blood. I looked at her and spoke not as owner, but as father. I gave you room to lead. But I see now that freedom without guidance is not leadership, it's drift. You need to learn the weight of each brick before you tell others how to carry them. I opened a smaller folder. Inside was her reassignment. Starting Monday, you will work in logistics under coordinator Alicia Kim. You will learn supply chains, scheduling, and the rhythm of the crews. You will report to her until you have earned the right to stand at this table again. I waits, end quote. Gasps moved across the room like a wave. Emma's face flushed deep red. You can't demote me, she said, her voice breaking on the last word. I kept my voice steady. I am not demoting you. I am teaching you. Titles mean nothing if they rest on hollow ground. Learn the ground, and the title will return stronger. And he wasn't to the way. She pushed back from her chair, her eyes glistening. This is humiliating. I shook my head. No, child. Humiliation is when a father who carried you through storms hears you call him useless. This is correction. This is grace. And he wasn't to the way. Silence followed. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to breathe loud. At last, Ruth stood and said, "It's the right call." Others nodded. Even Frank, who had known me longest, looked at me with solemn approval. The truth had settled in the room, and no one could sweep it away. Emma sat back down slowly, her hands shaking as she signed the reassignment form. She did not look at me. She looked at the paper as if it might burn her fingers. My heart ached. But I knew softness now would rob her of the chance to change. I turned to the rest of the room. This house was built on sweat and dignity. If we forget either, the walls will crack. From this day forward, respect will not be a slogan. It will be enforced in every corner. If you cannot live by it, you cannot work here. That includes my family. In the Cas Oltam, no applause. No cheers. Only the kind of stillness that means something true has landed where it belongs. The meeting ended with quiet nods. Papers gathered. Steps slow and thoughtful. Emma left without a word. The door closed gently behind her. I stayed behind, staring at the brass key on the table. My heart was heavy, but also steady. The lesson had been given. Whether it would be learned was not mine to decide. The week after the meeting felt different. The building breathed in a new rhythm. Workers greeted one another with firmer voices. Supervisors walked the halls with less fear. And for the first time in years, I sensed pride stirring again. Small things revealed the change. Coffee shared instead of rushed. Safety gear worn without complaint. Names remembered in morning briefings. It was not a revolution. It was a return. I kept my promise to be present. Twice that week I rode the elevator to the ground floor and walked the sites. Men and women who once lowered their eyes now met mine. Joe slapped my back and said, "Feels like the old days again." Mr. Harris. Alicia reported that efficiency had improved. Not because people feared cuts, but because they felt valued. Ruth sent me daily notes about safety compliance, climbing higher than any quarter before. These were numbers I could trust, because they came from dignity, not demand. Emma kept her head down in logistics. I watched from a distance. She hauled boxes with the crew, checked invoices, argued with vendors. The arrogance that once covered her like armor began to crack. One evening I saw her sitting on a crate, listening as Sarah, a young clerk, explained a scheduling problem. Emma nodded, asked questions, and even thanked her. That single word, "thank you," rang louder in my ears than any speech she had ever given at a board table. At home, the silence between us softened. She cooked dinner once, a simple pasta, and placed it in front of me without a word. We ate together. Halfway through, she set her fork down and whispered, "I didn't know, Dad. I didn't know who you really were to them, or to me." I swallowed hard. "You were never supposed to know. I wanted you to walk your own path. But some paths need guardrails." Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't let the tears fall. That night I sat on the porch with the brass key in my hand. Margaret's voice seemed to ride the evening breeze. She had always believed Emma would find her way, even if it meant stumbling first. I smiled at the memory and let the key rest on the table beside me. It had served its purpose. The door was open again. In the following days, I wrote letters to each of the crew leaders, thanking them for their loyalty. I walked through the community center and saw children playing under the plaque with my name. A boy asked who Samuel Harris was. His mother answered, "A man who believed we mattered." That answer filled me with more peace than any title ever could. On Friday, Emma knocked on my office door. She came in quietly, her face pale but steady. "Dad, may I sit?" I nodded. She folded her hands in her lap like she was back in school. "I was wrong," she said. "About you. About respect. I thought strength meant standing above everyone. But it doesn't. It means standing with them. I'm sorry. Friend." The words struck deeper than her cruelest ones ever had. I reached across the desk and took her hand. It trembled. But she did not pull away. "You are my daughter," I said. "That will never change. What matters now is what you do with what you've learned." She nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw in her eyes the little girl who once begged me to fight the storm. As she left, I leaned back and breathed deep. The lesson had been planted. Whether it grew was up to her. But the soil was ready. I had done my part. That evening, I walked slowly to the porch. The sky painted orange and violet. I thought of Margaret, of the men and women who built with me, of Emma's hand gripping mine. I thought of all the cracks in our house and how, with patience, they could be mended. Respect is not given by fear. It is earned by presence, by sacrifice, by love that refuses to die. And love, even when bruised, can still be rebuilt. I closed my eyes, listening to the rustle of the maple leaves, the hum of a distant train. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace.